So, Jonathan, you've represented hundreds of lawyers and law firms as their outside general counsel. So, what led you to focus exclusively on helping law firms with the business of law?
So, my dad is a lawyer in a different city, but he's the one that sort of led me down this path. And so at the time, I grew up as a business litigator, and I was doing a lot of business divorce work for closely held businesses. And my dad, down where I grew up on the Gulf Coast, I think in the span of 3 years, did like 5 law firm breakups. And he just said, "You're already doing this sort of stuff. You should just look at it because Atlanta is 10 times bigger." And so I started looking at it, and sure enough, they're going on all over the place. As you know, if you do this long enough, you've seen it. A lot of people probably been through it. But there wasn't really anyone in Atlanta that had sort of staked the flag and said, "Hey, this is my area." And so I just started down the path, and that was sort of the seed of it. So I had to sort of learn it all, market it. I was doing some pro bono work for friends, and then and just built it from there. That probably started about 15 years ago.
How did you learn the business side of things? Like, is that something that you grew up like studying, or you watched your dad do? Like, how did you learn that side of things?
So I've always been entrepreneurial. So I mean, I was selling candy as a kid, kind of stuff. I loved it. My undergrad degree was industrial engineering, which is really sort of like a business engineering degree. So I took all the accounting classes and statistics and that kind of stuff. Some finance classes, economics. So I always was interested in it, and it just so happens that law is sort of the business I went into. I didn't give that much thought. I'll be honest about that, but just sort of fell into that. But yeah.
So, if you think about a law firm that's like just starting out, even if it's like a solo or like a small firm, what do you think? What systems do you think that they should have in place from like day one to make sure that they've set themselves up for success long into the future?
Well, you got the basics. You got to have your bank accounts and your IELTS, all that stuff. But you got, in my opinion, you got to know how to get clients, or at least have a plan to go get clients. Some people leave a firm and they bring clients with them. That'll last you maybe for a little while, but then you're going to have to go get it. So if you have no idea how to do that, that's the first sort of system you got to learn. And lots of different ways to do it. I'm sure you've talked about it with lots of people, but that's the first thing. And then, from a legal standpoint, I think the number one thing you should get right is your client retainer agreement. That sets the stage for everything going forward. And there are things you can put in that will protect you in case you ever need it. And then, there are also other things you can put in there to set expectations with the client. There's lots of things you do with it. And I sort of view it as a first line of defense in case something goes sideways later. And depending on the state, there are certain provisions that might be enforceable in one state that aren't in another. And that's the other thing I'd say is I've looked at a lot of those, and somebody will put a provision in there thinking, hey, it's a contract, but not going to be enforced. Might even be unethical technically. So you got to be careful with that, but really spend some time on that agreement, I'd say, right at the beginning, because if you have a law firm, you're going to have clients. Got to get that straight.
One of the things I hear about, since I'm in PI, I mean, I hear about a lot of other horror stories where firm owner hires an associate, they assign cases to the associate, and it doesn't have to just be PI, but you see a lot in PI where associate leaves, takes a bunch of the clients, and then wants to screw the owner over when it comes to the fees. Are there any protections you can put in place, either from a retainer agreement with the client perspective, or from some sort of employment agreement, where you can help protect yourself as a firm owner?
Absolutely.
I want to hear about these. I think this is something that people would love to hear about.
And if you're a PI firm owner, this is 100%, you have to do it. If you hire any kind of attorney, whether it's of counsel, contract, partner, put in the partnership agreement, or an associate for sure. As everybody knows, you can't really have non-competes or non-solicits with lawyers. Clients always get to choose. And so if an attorney leaves, they have a right to sort of go to the client and say, hey, do you want to come with me? But with all that, all that in place, if you set up your agreements the right way, at a minimum, you will protect your downside. And I have I have a variety of these agreements that I've done for firms, and it's sort of on a spectrum of really aggressive to maybe less aggressive. And I've had situations where we've rolled them out at a firm, and the associates they get scared. I'll just say they sort of lose their mind a little bit. And so there's some educating and sort of some things you got to do. But the funny thing is fast forward some years later, I've had some of those associates who've later left and started their own firm. When they're hiring associates, they come back and say, I remember that. I want one of those too.
Damn right.
So, in my view, it's you're just trying to be fair. This is not about being unfair from an owner's perspective. I know a lot of associates would think, hey, this is not fair. But, the owner has put a lot at risk. They spent a lot of money to get these cases. They've trained up these people. And it is might be one of the biggest fears of any personal injury firm owner. And it puts you in a weird spot because most people want to grow. But if you don't delegate to other attorneys, it really hampers your ability to grow. So at some point, you're going to have to be able to do it. And so absolutely put these in place. We can go through some of the strategies.
I want to hear about, what are some of the strategies? And you don't have to give me your best stuff, but what are some good ways of what are some of the strategies?
Well, well, certainly, you want to put a fee split, sort of agreed upon fee split in place if they leave. Now, I've seen some where someone sort of self-drafted it, and I'll look at it, and it says, if you leave, you are prohibited from taking clients. That's not enforceable. It may feel good, but it's not enforceable. It may say, if you leave and take clients, 100% of the fees you get from those clients, you got to pay us. That's not going to be enforceable either. And so there are cases around the country, and it differs a little bit per jurisdiction, but if you go too high on the percentage split that has to be paid back to the firm, courts will say that's a financial penalty. It's the same as a non-compete, so we're not going to enforce it. So there is a range above which, if you get it, it's probably going to get thrown out. The way I like to do it is to create sort of a schedule. And so it's not on a per case basis, but it's really, or not on a blanket for all the cases, but it's on a case by case basis, depending on there's a couple ways you can go at it, but you're attempting to approximate the amount of work that was done at the firm versus after the firm. So you could sort of set the benchmarks or the schedule by procedural posture of a case, by time that the case has been at the firm. There's different ways you can go at it, but the fee splits, you got to have that in place at the beginning, and that sets your sort of bottom, worst day, I think. Now, and I can ramble on about this forever, but most states have the ethics rule about fee splits, and you have to disclose to the client and all that kind of stuff. When it's dealing with attorneys that used to be at the same firm that are now separating, you don't have to go through that process. So you don't have to go to the clients and say, hey, this is what we're doing. You can have a contractual agreement, and as long as it's reasonable and enforceable, the courts will say, yeah, we're gonna go by that. So that's a biggie.
I like the idea of using the procedural posture of the case as opposed to like a time, just because you're kind of incentivizing them to like sit on the case for a while for them to get more money. But if you do the procedural posture, like they've got to do something on the case. They can't just, unless you made it just like filing a lawsuit or something like that. But
well, it's more about the time that has been at the firm before they take it.
Gotcha.
So if they've been sitting on it at the firm, it's gonna work out for you probably.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. So that makes sense. What are some things? So this is kind of changing the subject a little bit, but what are some things that firms don't do? Like, what's one of the big things that firms don't do when it comes to a legal protection standpoint that you think that they should be doing?
Oh man, um, there's a lot of nuance in this, and there's a lot of little strategies that I've helped firms with over the years that sound really small that could have a huge impact. Um, so here's a quick example, particularly for bigger firms where you have lots of attorneys. Let's say you have 10 or more associates. When it comes to malpractice renewal time, there's always a question that says, "Are you aware of any claims or potential claims?" And oftentimes the owner checks no because they're not sure or they don't think there is anything. Maybe they go around the office and ask. Maybe they send an email, and hopefully you get accurate, true responses. Although I've been in situations where we created sort of an annual survey, and people lie sometimes. They get some of these attorneys, they don't disclose. So then we up the ante and we turn it into a sworn sort of document. They have to, under oath, say, yeah, I'm not aware of anything. And for the longest time, we thought that gave the owner cover for coverage, potential bust of coverage. But then I had a situation a while back where let's get a little technical about sort of the insurance policy itself. But because one of the attorneys was aware of the claim, that knowledge was imputed to the firm.
Oh,
Even though the firm didn't know about it, he had lied on the form. And so the firm lost coverage or potentially lost coverage. Luckily, we got rid of the case. But I learned in that instance, there is some sort of exclusion rider you can get that sort of severs that imputation of knowledge from an individual attorney to the owner. And so that for a bigger firm, that's like one of my top recommendations now. I've told other people about it. They've talked to their broker, and no one's heard of this. It's crazy. No one's heard of it.
so you as the owner need to go to the insurance company and say, I need this specific rider to produce. Is there a name for it, or is it just you just tell them what you're looking for? There may not be a name for it.
I think, I think it's called like prior knowledge exclusion. I can't remember what it was called, but I've told people that name and they've asked and they're like, I don't know what that is. And so then I show them what it looks like. So that's crazy. You would think, I mean, these brokers are nice people and they're not trying to screw you or anything, but they just don't know. And frankly, I didn't know until I came across it, a while back, a couple of years ago. So now it's something that, everybody really should get. And I don't think it adds, I mean, maybe it adds a little bit to the premium, but I don't think it's de minimis.
Yeah, I mean, worth it. I mean, that's especially when you're dealing with multiple associates that you're not touching all the files all the time. I mean,
just think if you had a death case and a malpractice on a death case, and the carrier came back and said, "Yeah, you don't have coverage." I mean, that's
big.
That's
a big
big
deal.
number. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Let's shift gears a little bit, and for firms that grow quickly, I mean, sometimes it can cause some infrastructure problems. So, what are some signs that you've seen where maybe the firm is growing maybe a little too fast, faster than what the infrastructure is built out to keep them scaling safely? So, what are some of those signs that you see where like, oh my gosh, they're going a little too fast here?
Yeah, that's a problem I think every law firm owner faces. I mean, it's sort of the balance of, you put a lot of money in the marketing, but you don't have the back end to handle it yet. And how do you balance the two? But I think if you start getting a lot of complaints from clients, everybody gets the Google reviews now. You start seeing a spike in really bad Google reviews. You started getting complaints saying nobody's calling me. that could be an infrastructure issue. It could be that you just got a bad pod or whatever. But that would be something I would look at. And obviously, if employees are complaining, definitely want to look into that. But that is, huge issue, and you got to be ready. And the other thing is, I'm sure you've talked about this a lot on the show, but many lawyers think the solution is to spend more money to get more leads, when oftentimes it's the intake in the back end that really needs sort of shoring up, and it might actually be more cost effective to do that first.
Are there some simple ways of shoring up the intake in the back end that are just really simple to do, that it doesn't cost a whole lot of money, that just they're things that just need to be done that would help shore those things up?
I think first thing I'll say, I'm not an operations expert. That's the first thing I'll say. So there are plenty of people out there that are intake specialists. I'm not one of them, but the first thing I think is you got to have your numbers. You got to know, do you have a leaky bucket or not? And if you're not tracking the right numbers, then you just don't know. And I've heard plenty of stories, personal stories from attorneys that believed they were signing 90+% of their cases, and then when they really started looking into it and running the numbers and seeing it, they're like, "Holy crap! It's more like 50 or 60%."
Wow.
And I've heard some really, really compelling case studies where people really came in and worked on the just the intake without increasing any marketing spend, and their case volume, significantly went up, 50+% just from that.
It's incredible.
And I don't know what they did. They explained it, they told me, but again, I'm not the intake expert.
Sure. So I want to ask you about partnerships and some advice. I've gone through a partnership breakup. It only lasted 18 months, but the breakup period was 7 days. It was pretty quick. Actually, we had a pretty easy breakup. It wasn't we weren't fighting for months. We weren't fighting over money and stuff. So it was kind of, I got lucky. But some advice that I'd gotten early on, and I can't say I really heeded the advice completely, but the advice I got, and I wonder what your thoughts are on this, but the advice I got was plan for the breakup. and I hated thinking about it that way. And that's why I can't say we heeded the advice completely. Now we did. We had all the documents put together and everything else, but I think that maybe that's what made it so easy. But I think more of his, he was reasonable, I was reasonable. I think that had more to do with it than the actual legal side of things. I wonder if you agree with that perspective though, where you plan for the breakup.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Okay.
That's the key.
I figured. Yeah.
I call it. I don't say plan for the breakup. I say you've got to lay out all the exit ramps. There are multiple ways someone can leave a partnership, or a partnership could, dissolve. And death, disability, retirement, somebody leaves, all sorts of ways they can leave, and you want to lay all that out in the partnership agreement. But the way I view it, it's not necessarily that it's going to be a contentious breakup necessarily, or somebody's leaving to steal the cases and go compete. That happens for sure. But sometimes it's just the visions change. Somebody, they're just tired of working. They've made enough money. They want to go enjoy life, so they just start coming in 2 days a week. And the other person says, "No, that's not what I want to do. I still want to bust it." And so then these resentments can build. And it's hard to put that back when people are sort of going different directions. And it's not necessarily that, they did anything wrong. But these sorts of things just happen. They just happen, especially in partnerships that have a big age gap. Just obviously somebody's going to hit sort of the end of the road sooner than the younger person. But even when you're similar in age, it's just your vision for what you want to do, your work ethic, all that stuff may be different. So you need to just have a plan in place for what it's going to look like. And the way I tell it too is you put all this into a partnership agreement, and it's sort of the fallback. If you can't, you could always negotiate something different at the time. But if you can't agree, then at least you've got an agreed upon sort of fallback of how you're going to deal with it.
So I'm glad you brought up the whole idea of like the older attorney, younger attorney, because you see a lot of times where either an attorney brings on an associate and they like the natural next step at some point is to make them a partner, or they they want to kind of get out and they want to bring on them as a partner to kind of have them take over the firm. What sort of steps should they take from a strategic standpoint, a legal standpoint, to make sure that one, they protect themselves as a business owner, but then also to make that transition in a way that benefits both sides?
So this is a rabbit hole here. This could be a full day podcast on this topic alone.
Okay.
And so it's an art, not a science. I'll start with that. And it's I've seen all scenarios. I do a lot of this stuff too. And so oftentimes an older attorney says, yeah, I want to hang it up and I want to give it to you. But they really don't. They can't let go. And part of it is their identity is just caught up in practicing law. So they may go to the young attorney and they may mean it. They say, I want you to take over in a couple years. And then a couple years go by and they're like, just a couple more. And then a couple, and so that sort of situation can be a big deal. And I sort of tell that story because I think and a very important part of it is the person that is sort of stepping back and letting somebody else take over. They have to, in their mind, be ready to let go. They have to know what their next chapter is. And if they're not there mentally, no matter what you do, planning, all that kind of discussions, it's just never going to work. And if you make promises and you don't keep them, the young attorney is going to leave. And then you're really, really screwed. I've seen some situations where the older attorney doesn't have anybody to hand it off to, and they really want to, and they've been looking, and maybe the person they thought leaves. And so they're stuck without anybody. So, I mean, there's lots to talk about there, but, from my perspective, the best advice I would give is really, think about it as soon as you can. Don't wait till 6 months before. I think I was on LinkedIn today. Somebody asked that question. I think a minimum 3 years. You gotta, I think. But ideally, you'd be thinking about it from the beginning. So, I mean, Tyson, you're young. You could be going a long time if you want. I mean, you could hang it up if you want to, probably. But now's the time really to think about it, because the decisions you make and the way you design your firm now can have outsized impacts 10, 15 years from now. And that includes sort of, lead generation, your ops, who you bring in, all those sorts of things.
You say that. I've been intrigued by this idea. I've thought about it a little bit, not a lot. I can't even say I've seriously considered it, but one of the teachers at my kid's school, he's made his money. And so what he did is he basically just stopped working. He's got money in the bank, and he's like, I'm going to teach at the school, and that he's going to basically go from school to school with the kids. And, he's going to, spend time with the family and all that, and do his hobbies and all that. And then if he wants to go back to work afterwards, he's going to do that. And I did find it to be an intriguing idea to sell. If you like, what if I sold the firm? So it was one of those things where you kind of sit there and you daydream. And what if I did sell the firm? I would have plenty of money just to kind of hang out with the kids and take them to school, pick them up, go to all the events. So, but that requires you getting the firm ready to sell and all that. So do you have any advice on anyone that wants to maybe sell the firm?
Yes. I mean, I tell people, and I've handled a number of these, and it's the less the firm relies on you, the more valuable it's going to be to somebody else. That's sort of your guiding star. So the more you can remove yourself You can't remove yourself completely because no one's going to care about it more than you do. I mean, it's the idea of an absentee owner, I think, is fairy tale largely. You got to have somebody that cares about it. But that doesn't mean you have to do everything all over the place in the firm. So, I don't know how you've set your firm up, but, you step away, you're not doing the trials. Then you step away and you're not doing any client work or very minimal. Then you step away, you're not doing any of the HR, the operations. And then at some point you step away and you're really not handling the financial piece. You have people doing all that. They report to you, and you can turn the knobs and you can sort of, design the initiatives, but then have other people do them. The more you can do that, the more valuable it's going to be, because then someone can basically buy you out and step into your shoes, and they're not buying a job, in other words.
Yeah. Do you have any opinion on the naming of the firm? So, for example, like our firm, the legal name is Mutrix Firm, but I've tinkered with the idea of changing it to more of a, I think generic sounds like a dirty word, but like a dirty name, but like, more of a generic name, right? That's not named after me. Do you have any opinion on if you're going to sell the firm, whether you should use a person's name, a generic name? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. If you're starting from scratch, I would encourage anybody out there that's fairly young or about to start a firm to think about using a trade name that doesn't have your name in it, assuming your state allows it. For a while there, some states didn't allow it. I think probably everybody does now at this point. And that's what I did for my firm. And there are lots of reasons for me. One thing that I'd seen a lot of, it's the fight about whose name is in the firm and where is it. And if somebody leaves, you got to change it again. And then you change in the URL, and you just always change, and clients are getting confused. So if you have a name that doesn't have any attorney name in it, it just makes that whole thing easier. I'm not a Google expert, but then there's sort of the Google SEO game that's out there. And then again, if Tyson Mutrix is gone and somebody steps in your shoes, if it's not your name, it matters less to them. Now, if you're a big firm that's been around forever, one of these big if you're Morgan & Morgan, you're not going to change your name. I mean, that is the brand at that point. And then, there are instances, I'll say, where a buyer may not care about your name. They may want to ditch the name anyway. So, not all buyers are going to care. Even if you had a trade name, they may still ditch the name. I've seen that too, because really they think their brand is more powerful. So, I'd say starting out, consider a trade name. If you've been doing it a while, it may not be worth sort of starting over.
So let's zoom out just for a second. Are there other ways of building value for the firm? And I know that you talked about really kind of removing yourself from a lot of the things. I'm assuming that makes it more valuable for the owner, or the buyer, because then they're not going to have to, bring you on if they don't want to. So are there other ways of increasing the value of the firm?
Yes. And so there's lots of reasons somebody may want to buy it. So let's say you're a strategic buy geographically. So somebody, wants to be in your city. So that could be of value to somebody. I think your people, your employees. I was hearing stories sort of during sort of the COVID times where no one could find any help. A strategy firms were using were acquisition just to get people. And so that, if you have a good, employees, that sort of thing, a good leadership team, obviously your marketing systems. If you've got a really good system set up to generate clients, and I don't mean pay-per-click type stuff. I mean, you've got thousands of clients that you've helped at this point. in your database, and you have a tried and true system for sort of staying in touch with them and generating cases out of that, that would be extremely valuable. And I think you got to prove it. So, you've got 2,000 clients, you got to track your leads. How much do you get out of that? And track it over time, so you can go to a potential buyer and say, look, now I'm not going to show you my list, but this is what we get from it. That would be extremely valuable, I think. So people, how you get cases, location. We talked about the name. There could be some value in a name. If you have a lot of, this may be changing with AI, I don't know, but if you had a lot of SEO juice in your website or websites, that might be worth something. Every now and then a phone number might be worth something. But those are sort of the big ones.
So you mentioned the case list. So tell us about, like, what's the anatomy of the sale of a firm, or the purchase of a firm? Like, if someone comes to you and says, hey, I want to potentially buy your firm, and they say, I want to show me your case list. It sounds like you don't have to show that to them. So what are the things you should do? What's the anatomy of that whole process look like?
Well, you do it in stages for sure. The disclosure of actual names. I mean, you've got the whole sort of confidentiality issue to deal with, but that should be done like basically right at the very end. That's the last thing you do. Before you do anything, stepping back, big picture, I think you should just have loose conversations about what you're thinking. If it gets past sort of these first few conversations, then you sign an NDA, and then that allows you to sort of have more detailed discussions and disclose more detailed numbers, financial numbers. And again, these are general type numbers. This is not, here's my QuickBooks and here's my case list. Because what you don't want to do is, let somebody, in the kimono, they see how you do it all. They say, yeah, never mind. And then they just go do it. Especially if it's somebody that's got a lot of money that could just reproduce what you're doing anyway. So you stage it out, do it a little bit at a time, because oftentimes as you go through the stages, one or both of the parties either decides, yeah, this is not going to work, or you just keep going. I've had so many of these never complete, that you start it and just never completes.
What percentage would you say never completes?
I'd say it's probably 2/3.
Wow.
I mean, and there's different types of transactions. So there's internal sales, external to a third party. But yeah, I mean, it's, there are a lot of talks and discussions that sort of don't go anywhere.
What's usually the reason why it falls through?
Unrealistic expectations on both
By
sides.
the buyer or the seller? Probably the seller is
Well,
my guess.
People always ask me, like, what's my firm worth? That's like the first question. What's my firm's worth? And my smart ass response is, it's worth whatever somebody will pay you for it. And a lot of times a buyer says, it's not worth it to me. And that could be that the seller believes it's worth way more than it is, or they can't walk away. That's another thing I've seen. There are a lot of lawyers that they spend all their money. So
they're locked in.
They need a big payday, or they got to keep working. So that's pretty common too. So,
for the ones where we were talking earlier about the attorneys that bring on an associate and they end up never leaving. Is that usually like a financial thing where they've got to keep working, or is it more of a, like, the law firm's their identity and they don't want to give it up?
It's a little both. It really is a little both. I mean, I've seen plenty where it is absolutely a financial thing. Some have kids late in life, they're in private school, they're in college. Some have to, think they have to, they may have been through a couple of wives or spouses, and they just got to keep working because they never saved anything. So there's definitely some of that. But then the identity thing is a biggie. It really is, especially for this older generation that's sort of at this moment. Their whole identity is really over, their career has been tied up in being a lawyer and working hard and working all those hours. And, the thought of what do I do tomorrow? You're talking about your friend that teaches. They don't have that. Talk to a lot of lawyers. What's your hobby? What do you do in your spare time? And they're like, I don't have any spare time. I don't have any hobbies. It's the law. And so, again, I think that is a huge thing. I think we all should have those hobbies. But if you're going to successfully do this, you got to know what you're going to do on the other side. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard from somewhere that the most dangerous time in a man's life is the year after he retires. It's like the death rates go way up, apparently. I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that.
I've heard that too. I'd love to know if that's true. I don't even want to look it up because I want to believe that it's true, just because I don't know. It's such a wild thing. Like the numbers I've heard are pretty crazy. But here's the thing. Speaking of death, I did want to ask you about that. So, and I don't think a lot of people want to think about this part, but I think that's part of the reasons why it matters so much. But the succession planning or incapacity planning, where this is like, I think succession's more of like, I'm sort of expecting to die. Incapacity is more like, I didn't expect to die this soon. So what's that conversation like with attorneys?
So that's a biggie. I mean, that is huge. And I really try to get all my sort of solos or solely owned firm owners to do this. And more are doing it, but I've seen the situation where no plan was in place. And I tell the story, my personal will. It took me 10 years and 3 different lawyers from start to actually signing the thing.
Wow.
And I just kept putting it off. And my wife and I were going out of the country, so we signed it the day before. And so that it took a while. So I get it. And in the law firm, we're basically doing a will for your firm. So it's a similar context, but I have seen situations where they did not have a plan in place, and it is a complete sad situation, shit show sometimes.
What if it's someone that's like, I'm a solo, what do I need a succession plan for? Talk to that person right now.
Again, it depends on the type of firm, but number one, your family, they're going to be dealing with all sorts of other things. You don't want to throw them in the middle of working on your firm. If you have any staff, I'm pure solo, it maybe needs it even more. But if you have any staff, you're like, oh, well, the staff will take care of it. The situations I've seen, if someone dies, the staff immediately get spooked and jump because they're like, I got to go to the job. So
I'm not going to have a job in a week, so I need to go leave. Yeah.
Yes. And so part of what I tell people is make the plan, put some, financing vehicles in place. Tell your staff you've got them covered. Don't jump. You're going to get paid. And then that at least helps wind down the firm. But, there's situations where, death or disability is not a defense to malpractice claim. So, and let's say you're a solo and you're like, oh, I've got personal life insurance. My estate has all this money. It doesn't matter. But then let's say you get hit by a bus and, you're like, well, I was going to file that, death case 2 weeks from now. The statute's coming up. I'm going to file that. But you die, and by the time anybody gets in there and discovers that it needs to be filed, it could be weeks or months after the statute's run. And then you got a malpractice case on your hand, and it would go against the attorney and the firm. And so let's say the attorney personally had assets in their name. They could go after those. And so it could have a negative effect on your family in terms of your estate. So, that's a biggie. Just for that, you should do it. But also, you want to take care of your clients. You want to make sure they're not, harmed in this process. You want to take care of your employees. And you want to protect your family from it. And I'll say this, generally speaking, if you go through the process to sort of set up a plan, you got to organize your firm a little bit, sort of a minimal amount of organization. And generally speaking, that helps the operation of your firm. So even if you're just going to keep going and nothing ever happens, the operation of your firm and conceivably the profitability of your firm should go up just from going through the process.
Nice. Well, part of it is we want to make sure people stay alive and healthy as long as possible. Is it true that you have exercised every day for nearly 900 days?
Yes.
Okay. That's wild. How has that discipline impacted your business?
Well, I'm one of these, check the box kind of folks. I think I've heard John Fisher talk about it. He's one of these guys too. And I like to keep that streak going. It all comes from that Seinfeld.
He loves streaking. He likes streaks. Yep.
It's that Seinfeld joke a day thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm getting older, and health is important to me. I want to be in as good a shape as possible. And I've gone through periods where I have not exercised, and this could be a stressful job, and I just my stress levels go up. I feel bad, and the exercise cuts that. And so it just I can feel it. If there, I had a long streak before this current streak, and then I missed it. COVID happened and sort of blew my streak. But I started feeling bad. I just started feeling bad. And so yeah, I love it.
What do you like to do the most? What's your go-to workout?
I lift weights. I do cardio. That's that. I don't go to the gym every day, but that's a big part of it.
Yeah. Do you do any play any sports, anything like jujitsu, anything like that?
No, my back is screwed up, so I got to be careful about that. So jujitsu would really mess me up, I think.
Yeah, I asked that because I started it about a year ago, so it's like I'm currently standing here in pain, back pain. So the reason I ask is like 900 days is a very consistent, like that's a lot. So I was going to ask you, there's had been days where you were in pain or you felt sick, something like, how do you get the motivation to fight through days like that?
It's become a habit. The way I sort of, about any new habit, sort of the way I think about things, and this sort of demonstrated exercise is one way to demonstrate it. It's like, when you start something new, you're excited. So you've got just this excitement, and that'll carry you for a while. Then that starts to wear off, and then you got to use willpower, and that can only last you for so long. And so if you don't make it a habit and fit it into your life in a way that it is a habit, then you're not going to do it. So for me, the exercise, I got to do it in the morning, first thing, pretty much. Because I found if I say, well, I'll do it at the end of the day, life happens, and it's just the chances of that happening are, it just goes way down. So for me, it's first thing in the morning. It's just part of my morning routine. I get up and, look at Twitter for a while and then go to the gym. So.
You have this really good post. You say, are you addicted to the planning or the doing? Planning is fun. Doing is often not. In the end, the doers are the ones who win. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So, I'm a shiny object kind of guy. So I was talking to myself a little bit there. But, and I like strategy. So I really like coming up with these grand plans to do things. But I have found that, ideas and plans aren't really worth that much because doing stuff is hard. Building a firm is not easy. It's hard. And so there are lots of things you got to do, and you got to do it consistently, day in, day out. And there are days where it's not fun. There are days where you may second guess yourself, but you just got to keep doing it and not get distracted with these shiny objects and planning and all that stuff over there. So that's what I meant by that.
So how long have you owned your firm?
So I started it about almost 7.5 years ago.
Yeah. And things seem to be going well for you. And so I wonder if you could give some advice to people that either they're just starting out or maybe they're a few years in, they've kind of hit that point where they feel like they've kind of stagnated and they're like, okay, is this going to get better? What do I do here? Because sometimes people get to this point where like they sort of stagnated and they're like, am I ever going to get through this? Should I just, wind things down and go work for someone? I guess what advice would you give to someone that's sort of in that situation?
Well, the first thing I would ask is, are you employable? Do you need to be the boss? And so that's the first thing. And you got to believe in yourself. But the other thing, that old Hemingway quote about bankruptcy, how did it happen? It was slowly, then all of a sudden. I think that's success of a law firm. I mean, you're going to plateau and it's going to feel like you're going nowhere for a long time. You just got to keep doing what you're doing. And a lot of the seeds that you plant take months or years to grow, but once they bear fruit, it's just everywhere. You just got to sort of get there. And so I would say hang tough. Now, there are specific situations where, you need money or whatever, you may have to go get a job. I get it. But if you can push through, I would say keep pushing.
So I was just doing a little bit of math in my head. I'm going to go back to your workouts a little bit because I think it's related because you're talking about consistency and like the Seinfeld with the jokes and all that. Same things apply to the firm. But so today's 890. So you're 10 days away, I think, from your getting to 900. So your most days in a row was 1,057. When you get to 900, are you going to do anything special? Do you celebrate or are you just like, it's another day?
It's just another day.
Incredible.
And let me back up. I mean, when I say work out or whatever, exercise, so, it could be going for a 30-minute walk. I mean, a few years ago, we went to Disney and I walked, basically 30,000 steps a day. That counts, right? In my mind, that counts as being active. It doesn't have to be like an actual exercise at the gym type thing.
Listen, I think that counts. I don't even try to discount that. I think I think that's completely valid. And, I think it's impressive. I think, gosh, do you track do you have like a Whoop or anything where you track your steps or anything else?
I do. I have a Fitbit for my steps and sleep, which is really bad, but, it's hard for me to sleep, but I have this little this habit tracker. It's called Habit Share. You probably know Tom Tona. He put me onto this. So it's pretty cool. It's sort of an accountability and a tracker. So you can, you set up what you want to track and then you can share it with people so they can, if you're not doing it, they can call you and say, hey, you didn't exercise today. And so that's how I know. So yeah, today is 891 for my days. So.
Oh, well, that's fantastic. Well, we're going to end it on this. So you're the outside general counsel for law firms, right? And most lawyers don't think that they need a lawyer until it's too late. So what is your parting advice to anyone that has that mindset that, they don't need a lawyer. They are a lawyer, so I don't need a lawyer. So what is your advice to those people?
Well, I'd say this, I get this a lot. So lawyers, I mean, we're smart. You can probably go figure it out if you know what the issue is. You might spend a lot of time getting there, but you can probably get there. And this is the old, Donald Rumsfeld, known unknowns and unknown unknowns. You don't know what you don't know. And somebody like me, there are others like me, we see a lot of different firms and have seen a lot of different situations, and we can bring that, what we learn over here, we can bring to a client over there. And so, and I've looked at a lot of do-it-yourself agreements over the years by lawyers who are smart, and some of them just really are not very good. So be careful out there.
Love it. Jonathan, how do people get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you?
Sure. Find me on LinkedIn. That's a good place. Jonathan Hawkins. My email is jhawkins@lawfirmgc.com. Feel free to reach out to me there. Website, lawfirmgc.com.
Love it. Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Tyson.